Hey there, how's it going? Today I'm in my different persona, and that is Oscar. Oscar, right here. Oscar is um, the character in me that paints houses and then forgets to change shirts before he goes to the university. So this is my outfit when I'm painting. If you can tell, this is where most of the paint goes right here. It's on my hands. Well, every once in a while, I hit this side. Um, There, I almost look like maybe I'm just Oscar now. Yeah. Um, Anyways, hi. We're going to go into more history in this session. And this time we're looking at the development of the photograph, the camera, and how that sparked the advancements that led to photograph in motion. And we're going to start off with looking at Niepce in France, who developed the very first photo. You'll see that for a brief moment. It's a really interesting shot of like rooftops and buildings and whatnot. And then Niepce ended up working with this gentleman named Daguerre, who they developed the daguerreotype. And we're going to look at the process of the daguerreotype. I will cut that film a little short because it gets a little too, scientific for us right now, as we just want to kind of move forward and keep the pace going. Then from there, we go into Edward Muybridge and the capture of animal locomotion. He's the gentleman who was able to prove that when a horse is in its trot, that all 4 feet are off of the ground. Kind of a really interesting story behind that. So we'll take a look at that. And from there, we end up moving into some advancements made by Emile Reynaud, who we looked at earlier in the toys, who created the praxinoscope. Obviously, we're going to look at the timeline here, and you're going to see that like things are just blowing up everywhere. People are getting really excited about these new advancements in this technology and art form, and constant struggle to see who can like grab it and make the next thing. Again, bigger, better, faster, cooler, right? Because it's a moment where the buzz culturally was huge. We're going to look at after that what the work that Thomas Edison was doing. Wonderful inventor. Like this guy was very busy. He was taking note of everything that was happening with the camera and film and things in motion, perhaps, and worked with Eastman of maybe you're old enough to remember that it was Eastman Kodak of Kodak Film. Trying to find a way to take film strips on the cellulose, and create perforations, that didn't exist. So first it was happening without perforations, and then he developed a machine to punch holes and then create cranks and things to grab, and it's wild. But that led him to build the kinetograph, which was a machine to view short films on a loop. You'd go into a parlor and pop in, a penny or a nickel. That's where the Nickelodeon term started, by the way. And you would go to this box and you'd put in your little coin and put your eyes on the thing, and you'd watch, something happen for 5, maybe 10 seconds. And it would blow your mind. It was such magic. You were watching the world come to life in the form of some new art form that you've never seen before. And for a lot of people, it was very magical, or it was very like shocking and alarming, to be able to look into a tiny little window and see something that was documenting something like boxing cats or a strong man or something, which you would have to go see in person normally. So the magic is really huge here, and that is the power of film and the camera that was delivered to the world, right? And this was a moment when sharing things as true as the image is was just only done with paintings or drawings before. So really a breakthrough moment. What does this have to do with animation? It has to do with this thing I keep talking about, which is observation of invention and then reinvention and development. Because this is where people started to really see things move now in a new art form, the photo. We've already seen it with toys and illustrations and the use of persistence of vision. And then the technology was happening where you could create mechanisms that would work with film, with perforations and whatnot. So obviously it would lead to a point when the more creative or artists types would take this into a new angle. From Edison, we then move to the Lumiere brothers. The Lumiere brothers saw what Edison had done, had created a camera and a projector, but you had to look into it. They said, this is cool, but we want to make it bigger and better. Once again, another point where this is happening down the chain of things. And they create the cinematoscope. And the cinematoscope can record images, but also project them. And so we had some experiences over in Europe where the Lumiere brothers were pulling from their own inspiration from what Edison had done and created the cinematoscope. And they projected films on a screen and to an audience who had never seen this before. Imagine never ever seeing a film and being there and seeing the film. Blew people's minds. One of the images or sequences that they had shown was a train coming into a station. And according to observations of this showing, people thought there was a train that was going to run them over. They didn't really understand that there was just this flat screen and this was not a reality. So, wow, we take so much for granted right now, right? But we think back about these moments when this was the first time these things were happening, it was really exciting. And obviously, people who had the know-how or the inkling to buy into it and take it and make it something their own is what was happening right here. So then we look at Georges Méliès. Georges Méliès went and saw a production from the Lumiere brothers and was fascinated. At this point, he was more of a stage guy, did magic shows and things like that. He saw what was happening with cinema at this very dawning moment, and begged the Lumiere brothers for a camera. It was going to offer them money, and they said, "No, this is not a thing. It's just a fad. Why would we do that?" Then he offered them a really crazy amount of money, and they still said no. So Georges Méliès went and got a buddy who knew how to do engineering work and built his own machine that could do what they did. And he went on to make films, an incredible volume of films in a very short amount of time. But Georges Méliès is responsible not just for advancing filmmaking and storytelling in that form, but also special effects and new camera techniques and editing techniques that had never been seen before, but have sparked all of the techniques that we look at today: mats and masks, stop motion, replacement animation. He's really responsible for that. So we'll just finish up with Georges Méliès and A Trip to the Moon. So what does this timeline look like? This timeline is pretty impressive. So this is the span of 1800 to 1900, and not a lot going on for a while, until 1826 when this first photograph was created. And it wasn't too long after that, another 13 years, when the daguerreotype was released to the public, because Louis Daguerre felt that this needed to be in the hands of everybody. So he gave it to the government, and when you do that, it apparently is like public domain at that time and place. So people all over Europe fled to France in order to get their hands on this machine. And we'll have a look at that. And then it's not for another 40 years before someone takes that photographic power and develops the idea of sequential capture, and that's Edward Muybridge. And then it's a year after that when Emile Reynaud develops the theater praxinoscope, and then it's another 10 years almost when he even takes that further and projects it onto a screen. That technology was pretty cool. And then a year later, Edison develops that first film strip. That changes everything. And then in 5 years, he's made the kinetograph. And then the year later, the Lumiere brothers and Edison as well created ways to project the actual film. And then we close out that 19th century. And Georges Méliès is doing incredible film work, and the most monumental film at that point in 1902 was A Trip to the Moon. Quite impressive. So we're going to look at some of these films, and here and there I will pop in and chat over those things. So just bear with me.
Although photography is a relatively new creative art, the preservation of early photographs is becoming increasingly urgent as digital imaging replaces the chemical photographic processes.
So, shall we rotate it to see
plexiglass? Yes, let's
well
turn
it
this around
survived
and
from
check
the
the
back?
back.
Over a decade before the public announcement of daguerreotype photography in 1839, the image acknowledged as the world's first photograph is this image by French inventor Joseph Nicephore Niepce.
If you would think about the first photograph, it is really interesting to imagine that the whole history of development of photography, the whole history of development of film and television as well, projected back goes to one point, and that is the point in 1826 when Joseph Nicephore Niepce made this image we are working on today.
If you listen really carefully, yeah.
The first photograph is now part of the Harry Ransom Center in Texas. As part of a major collaborative research project, the image was brought to the Getty Conservation Institute, where it was studied to determine its exact composition.
Samples collected from inside.
Great. There's such a great need for research in the area of photograph conservation, in large part because photography is such a young field of craft, art, and technology, particularly when you compare it with paintings or sculpture, which have had thousands of years of history.
On Monday afternoon, August 19th, 1839, the French Academy of Science held a special meeting to publicly disclose the formula for making daguerreotypes. The technique's inventor, Louis-Jacques Daguerre, had sold his formula to the French government so that it could be made freely available to the public without patent restrictions. The new medium seized the public's imagination. Daguerreotype mania swept through Paris and across Europe. All who saw daguerreotypes for the first time were equally impressed. Viewers took them to be completely faithful depictions of nature. As quickly as railroads and steamships could travel, news of the invention spread around the world. Nowhere was the daguerreotype more popular than in America, a young democracy and a mecca of progress. The daguerreotype studio attracted a wide cross-section of Americans. People from all walks of life could now afford to have their portraits made, and they did. For all their popularity, producing daguerreotypes was a labour-intensive process, requiring a lot of equipment and skill. The daguerreotype plate is made of copper faced with silver. To secure it and make it easier to handle, the plate is placed silver side up on an adjustable block. In order to prepare the plate for exposure, it has to be polished. In this modern demonstration of the daguerreotype process, the daguerreotypist applies a small amount of white powder, called rottenstone, to a cloth moistened with dilute alcohol. The daguerreotypist applies the alcohol and rottenstone to the surface of the plate using a consistent motion. The daguerreotypist sprinkles a fine red powder known as rouge onto a long padded stick. The plate is then buffed using the rouge. Polishing the plate in the same direction improves viewing of the highly reflective surface. The plate is then buffed a second time with a clean padded stick in order to increase its reflectivity. It is now ready to be made light sensitive. In the dark, the daguerreotypist places the polished plate face down in a sensitizing box, which contains a small amount of iodine crystals. In about 15 to 45 seconds, fumes from the iodine react with the silver, coating the plate with silver iodide. This process would then be repeated with fumes from bromine or quickstuff. From the sensitizing box, the daguerreotypist removes the plate, now coated with bromo iodide of silver. The plate is now light sensitive and ready for use in the camera. The daguerreotypist places the light sensitive plate in a plate holder with the coated side down. It is then secured into place. The viewing glass is lifted out of the camera and replaced with the loaded plate holder. The dark slide is removed to make the plate accessible for the exposure. To make the exposure, the daguerreotypist removes the lens cap. Early exposure times were notoriously long and sometimes uncomfortable, often taking more than 20 seconds. To ensure that the sitter did not move during the exposure, an 1840 Boston newspaper recommended the following.
His head should be placed on a semicircle of iron fitted to the back of the chair. His arms may be arranged at pleasure. He should fix his eyes on some well-defined object in any direction which he may prefer. Now, if everything is arranged as it should be, your portrait will often be made even in less than 20 seconds and in the most satisfactory manner.
In the dark, the daguerreotypist develops the plate. A few ounces of liquid mercury are very carefully poured into a flaring iron vessel, heated by an alcohol lamp. The exposed plate is removed from the plate holder and placed face down in the mercury chamber, which is heated to approximately 175 degrees Fahrenheit. After mercury vapor reacts with the sensitized silver, the daguerreotypist removes the developed plate. The daguerreotypist then fixes the plate, making it safe for viewing in normal light by pouring on it a solution of hyposulfite of soda. This removes the excess bromo iodide of silver not acted upon by light in the camera. After it has been thoroughly washed, a gilding stand is used to finish the plate. A weak solution of chloride of gold is gently heated over an alcohol lamp. This hardens the plate and adds to the beauty and permanence of the image. After a final cleaning of the plate, the daguerreotype is assembled for safekeeping and display. The plate is put into a shallow hinged case that includes a decorative mat and preserver, both of brass, and a glass cover with taped edges. Daguerreotype studios presented their wares in a variety of cases, ranging from simple leather or cloth-covered wood to elaborate examples of inlaid mother-of-pearl and molded thermoplastic. Their assembly was an example of industrial-age production. The work was often done by women and children, as in this factory, one of the largest of its kind. It is estimated that by the mid-1850s, in the United States alone, approximately 3 million daguerreotypes were produced annually, representing a retail industry of $7.5 million. In 1849, an American author concluded,
In our great cities, a daguerreotypist is to be found in almost every square. It is hard to find the man who has not shadowy faces of his wife and his children done up in morocco and velvet among his household treasures.
What does this image have to do with this? Or this? One would think that they were totally unrelated. But the truth is, none of this would have been possible if it weren't for photographs like this one. It was the eccentric photographer Edward Muybridge who started taking pictures of moving bodies, depicting motion very similarly to the way we see a movie today. And it all started here at Stanford University. In 1872, railroad tycoon Leland Stanford commissioned Edward Muybridge to take photographs of his prized racehorse, Occident. Stanford wanted to know whether a galloping horse's four hooves ever left the ground at the same time. So in order to figure this out, Muybridge used 12 cameras that were activated by strings as the horse galloped through. He did this all on Stanford's family farm, not far from where the Cantor Art Center stands on Stanford University today. In the end, not only did Muybridge prove that all four hooves of the horse did, in fact, leave the ground at the same time, but he also caused a sensation in the general public. For the very first time, the world had a better understanding of the true nature of motion. Muybridge then set to work, delving into more studies of motion, capturing the movements of everything ranging from pigeons to lions to human beings carrying out their daily tasks. Muybridge was a man of intrigue. In 1860, he was involved in a terrible stagecoach accident which nearly killed him. Muybridge was left with a devastating brain injury, one of its several effects being that he could no longer smell or taste. He lived out the rest of his days as a strange, erratic character, often seen absorbed in his work and always with some innovative piece of technology. For many, the most important thing we remember about Muybridge is the aftermath of his photos. Because of his work, motion pictures were possible. While the motion picture itself only became prominent in the later years of his life, Muybridge greatly influenced the industry. His serious photography greatly influenced Thomas Edison, who introduced the use of high-speed shutters into movie-making technology. Many of Muybridge's serious photographs reside in museums like the Cantor Art Center, welcoming all to experience the legacy of a photographer who really planted the seed for popular entertainment as we know it today.
Further inspiration had been found during a visit to Paris in 1889, where Edison had met French scientist Etienne Jules Marey, whose chronophotography captured 12 consecutive images per second on a long, continuous piece of film.
Marey had been filming birds by converting a gun into a camera, so that as he pulled the trigger, he was actually taking rapid pictures of them with strip film. And this influenced Edison to go back and experiment with roll film.
Motion picture technology is difficult. You have to have film that stops, gets the image, advances, stops, gets the next image, and it has to do that 20, 30 times a second. So you need film that can take the beating. You need film that's sensitive enough to do it. Edison worked with George Eastman to develop the film with the sprocket holes, figuring out how the machinery is going to advance the film, stop it, advance the film, stop it. And he developed a really terrific camera, and that was his contribution.
Throughout, Edison had worked closely with his assistant in the mining operation, a sometime photographer named William Dixon, who was largely responsible for the optics of the device. Now, Dixon had begun to produce the first films in what eventually would be the Edison Company's extensive catalog, a collection of short features meant to be shown one at a time on a coin-operated peephole viewing cabinet called a kinetoscope.
The first motion picture entertainment device was a genius contraption that allowed you to see a loop of film, a very short loop.
The inaugural batch of kinetoscopes shipped from West Orange in April 1894, 5 to Atlantic City, 10 to Chicago, and 10 to a small storefront in Manhattan, a former shoe shop near Herald Square, soon to become the world's first commercial kinetoscope parlor.
They were setting up the machines, getting ready to open, and curiosity seekers had gathered, and they decided to let them in to give the machines a try. And it turned out to overwhelm them. The public poured in. The novelty of the thing was incredibly attractive.
So here we're looking at that image of someone actually using this machine, and some of the images that they might gather. There's a little bit of the internal mechanisms. You got to see things that maybe you'd only be able to see if you had the ability to go to a carnival somewhere. This is a wonderful piece. It's gonna mute that for me on my end. So this one's called The Kiss. So, at this time, intimacy and whatnot were just something you kept at home. And all of a sudden you'd go into a theater, you'd be sitting in a seat, and you'd be watching this, be like, oh my God, I shouldn't be watching that. That was really risque. And it might,
From the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C.
So, obviously, we see a lot more stuff. Here's the muscle man, Sandow, the strong man. It's incredible. I just love seeing that. So like our perception of the muscle man, I mean, this guy is ripped for sure, but think about what you see now in bodybuilding and whatnot. Like the body has changed so much in just 150, 200 years. Is it 200 years? Not yet. Not even 150. But, this would be something that you'd only see at the circus. This has been a presentation of the Library of Congress. And check it out either
Visit
in
us at
the Cinemascope or in a theater. So that was all very documentary-like, right? Just documenting things in life, people doing things. So Edison started to play with, let's get a little, out of reality and have fun. And so there are also films like this one, The Boxing Cats, where it's very, it's fun, it's comical. All right, we're going to get into theater optique now.
Now here on my movieola, I have a film that reenacts the story of Emile Reynaud and his remarkable theater optique.
If you can name who that gentleman was, then you're on top of things.
Reynaud was a painter of lantern slides who lived in a small apartment in Paris in the year 1877. He was intrigued with the early animation devices. He studied and read all he could about them in the scientific periodicals of his day. Finally, he invented a machine of his own called the praxinoscope, which borrowed the interchangeable action strips from the zoetrope. But he replaced the slits on the zoetrope with mirrors set edge to edge around a revolving center. Each individual picture on the outer rim is reflected on one of the mirrors. And here, with a charm that still enchants and delights us today, the images glide and flow along with a mysterious life of their own. Still, Reynaud wasn't satisfied. Soon he hit upon the idea of drawing his pictures on strips of black paper. This enabled him to combine a background on a separate card with the action drawings. The complete effect was viewed through a tiny proscenium. He called his improved machine the theater praxinoscope. Here one could see a vaudeville show in miniature. Just a simple change of scenery, a new cast of characters, and a brand new act is ready to start. It doesn't matter that the entire performance lasts only a few seconds, or that the strip is made up of only 12 poses. it still keeps you spellbound. You want to see it again and again. But to Reynaud's mind, this still left much to be desired. He wanted something better and bigger. At last, he had it. The short picture strips had been expanded to a long band containing 500 hand-painted slides drawn on transparent gelatin. Small holes punched between each image foreshadowed the perforations on modern film. Each hole meshes into the teeth of the large wheel, rotating at the same speed as the 36 mirrors at the center. Each individual image is lighted up separately. By an interplay of mirrors and lenses, the ray of light is reflected back to a mobile mirror, which in turn projects the enlarged image onto a screen. By adapting the principle of the magic lantern to his machine, he was able to project a background onto the same screen. Here, his actors were life-size. Here, he could almost create the illusion of reality. From a toy in the home, his idea had grown into a form of public entertainment. Reynaud called it the Theatre Optique. Here, the people of Paris could view a complete quarter-of-an-hour performance. In the course of his career as a showman, he produced 7 different shows, all accompanied by appropriate mood music. For more than 10 years, Reynaud worked here behind the screen that separated the audience from his primitive projection booth. And in this period, he played to over 500,000 delighted patrons. It is safe to assume that not many of his viewers ever gave a thought to the vast amount of effort that lay behind what they were seeing. And it is quite probable that not even Reynaud himself had the slightest inkling of the heights toward which his first true prototype of the animated cartoon was pointing the way.
Okay, so the Lumiere brothers capturing film and broadcasting it on a projection. Still very documentary in style. This is workers leaving the factory, I think it's called something like that. And, you know, this is all it is. Look at that dog, it's huge. You know, this was entertaining for people. Awesome, right? And it's the dawn of the documentary film right here. This is what we're looking at. But fascinating for an audience, especially if you're looking at anything that was coming from a different culture or a different place where you've never been. You now get to see it, right? So this is all taking place in Europe. Well, these films were also shown in the US and other parts of the world. So you got to get a glimpse of, like, you know, what clothing styles look like, or building techniques, and even transportation and whatnot. This just keeps going, by the way. It's fine. Let's just have a watch. I'm still trying to figure out this microphone and my speaker setup, so once in a while I forget to turn the microphone on mute, and so you might get a little feedback. I apologize, but I'm getting this done. Lots of people going out a very big door. And I love how some of them have these bikes, and these bikes, that's like the original, what is that, the one-speed bike that everyone thinks is so cool, which I don't have any idea why people ride it. The fixed gear, yeah. Oh, this is neat. People getting off of a boat to go to work. You know, like, how neat is that? At this time in our, well, this was special to see, and look at how fancy everyone is dressed. It's neat. Like, for us, just to see this glimpse of history is really cool. At the time, this was kind of the norm, but like I was saying, cultural exposure here is huge. Hey, there's a photographer. Probably a friend of these guys. Yep. And then just life at home. This is fascinating. But these are the things that they would capture. They did not have, you know, the artistic gumption of trying to make things out of, you know, distant from reality. It was just like, hey, can we film you during tea time with your child? And they'd be like, this is lovely. I don't really know what you're doing, but. And then, you know, in a couple of weeks, those guys got to see themselves on a screen, and they were probably amazed, watering a garden. So now maybe they're getting a little creative, right? So we're watching how, like, well, you know, all these things are neat, but maybe we need to give them a little bit more. And they're tapping into the world of vaudeville, the gags, right? So now they're getting actors, and they're playing out things that aren't expected from reality, from what we were normally seeing in these documentary type films. Like, so that's fun. So even these guys are getting it. Card games, now it's probably going to get a little gaggy. Every card game needs some champagne. Actually, that's pretty, that looks like stout. It's an ale. All right, so this is the train approaching the station. This is the film I was talking about, where people, like, were going, run away! Like, for real, that actually happened. They had never seen anything like this, and they're sitting in front of a big screen. At that time, it wasn't that big, you know, but big enough. And this train comes up. Yeah, they thought that their lives were in danger. It's wild, right? Think about that. That is so wild. All right, these are fascinating pieces. We're gonna skip through this. You can also watch this movie.
Georges Méliès is the pioneer of motion picture
now we're gonna
special
look at
effects. He started at about 1898. He was a former magician, and he saw in the motion picture camera a way to make his special effects and tricks on stage more accessible to the audiences. His films are not particularly long on plot, particularly early ones, but they invented things like, for example, stop motion, mats, where one image is enclosed inside another, superimposition, dissolves. All of these special effects basically initiate with Georges Méliès. His most famous film is A Trip to the Moon, made in 1902, which has been parodied countless times and even referenced in a video by the Smashing Pumpkins, which basically shows a trip to the moon by a group of scientists and more or less is the prototype of the modern science fiction film. Georges Méliès' career is curious because he was an early victim of piracy. His films were basically copied all around the world because it was much cheaper to just buy a print of a film at that point, keep it, and use it. And so these pirated versions basically are what survive today. Because although Méliès was a brilliant cinematographer and fantastic set designer, he built most of his own sets and created amazing special effects, which were really unrivaled until King Kong in the 1930s. He was a terrible businessman. And so that all of his negatives were ultimately put into storage. And then when he couldn't pay the storage bill, the films were burned and melted down for their silver nitrate content. And if it weren't for the pirated versions of Georges Méliès' films, none of them would survive. Méliès himself, of course, did not survive this blow to his career in his company's star film. He became destitute and was eventually given a subway newsstand by the French government, and he died in the 1930s, almost completely forgotten. But yet Georges Méliès' films continue to delight and fascinate audiences to this day and are a reminder of the origin of spectacle and special effects, just as the Lumiere brothers are the origins of the documentary for the worlds of fantasy and wonder and amazement. Georges Méliès' films basically are the benchmark which basically set the standard for contemporary cinema and continue to do so into the future.
Yeah. You can understand that someone went and saw the Lumieres, someone like George, saw the Lumiere brothers and their work and was captivated, wanted to go. But, you know, Méliès was a vaudeville guy and a magician, a performer, knew about what people wanted on, you know, from the stage, you know, from the audience perspective, understood story, gag, and magic and things like that. And so the work that he was doing was epic. And everyone in film today can pay gratitude and express the amazing work that Méliès brought to the table as far as special effects and editing and whatnot. So that concludes our pre-animation run. So I think you have a pretty good understanding of why these toys and these other inventions were, you know, huge players for what is in line next. And so we're going to basically depart filmmaking at this point and only look at animation from here forward. The other thing that is interesting to as I've watched all of these things so many times, and I learn more and observe more and understand more every time I see them. But it is really interesting to think about like global perspective of what's happening here. Something happens in Europe. It takes, you know, a while, trains and boats and whatnot, time to reach somewhere else in the world. Someone sees it, gets excited, they do something, and then it takes that long for it to get back to where those origins were. And there's this really interesting back and forth. And, you know, at this point in time, I don't think it's competitive. It's just strictly healthy, right? You do start to get, as we move into some different eras, you know, maybe where there is sort of a competitive back and forth, but there's this really long ping pong, you know, tennis game going back. We're like, hey, we did this and this is happening over here. And they're like, wow, do you see what's going on over there? Let's bring it here. And then it's brought to the US and someone goes, whoa, that's amazing. Let's change it and make it better and try to advance this and that. And then it goes back to Europe. and then, you know, someone sees it and they try to do it again. It's this really neat back and forth, you know, table tennis match of invention and entertainment. All right, thank you, and I look forward to sharing with you the next bits of history.